Is inbox zero really possible? How do you handle an email inbox with literally thousands of email? And what tools can help us master our email? We'll answer these questions and more on the 133rd episode of the DoughRoller podcast.
Welcome to the DoughRoller podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Whether you're just starting out, buried under a mountain of debt, or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances and your email to the next level. Hey, everybody. Hope you're having a great day. I had mentioned this in a previous podcast. I wanted to talk about how I handle my email. Like it or not, for I think the vast majority of us, email is part of our lives. And it can become overwhelming. We have email from work. We have usually one or more personal email addresses, and it covers everything from email to friends and family. You have to provide your email for logins to countless websites. You get notices from LinkedIn and Facebook. You do online shopping, and they of course want your email, and they start sending you sales emails and coupons, and some of these things may be helpful, may be useful. A lot of the time, they're just downright annoying. And then, if that weren't bad enough, you've got that email every Saturday at 7 p.m. from my newsletter just to add to the pile. At least I hope you do. So I kind of part of my own system that I've been working on. I've talked about a couple of things in past emails, such as habits, mini habits, habit stacking, things like that. I'm trying to figure out the best way. Really, in some ways, it's just the best way to live. And it affects everything from my work to managing my finances to just managing my life. And email has been a big problem for me for a couple of reasons. First of all, I'm not by nature an organized person. I'm not a complete disaster either. I guess I'm probably average, but there's parts of me, times when I wish I were that type A personality, everything organized, everything in its place. That's kind of how I want to be, and I'm just not there. I'm a lot closer to that than I was, years ago. But you see it in my email, and it really became a problem. Honestly, you guys were the problem. How about that? I'll blame you guys. When I started this podcast, one of the things that I encouraged, and I still do, is for folks to reach out to me. And I say that on almost every episode. Email me, dr@doughroller.net. I give out my email. Well, that email address is, the main email for my blog. And so even before this podcast, it got a lot of email, not only from readers of the blog, but then other bloggers that I know and interact with, companies. I get a lot of email from folks that want to connect for some reason. They've got a new product that they think my readers, or readers of the blog might be interested in, or I get contacted by the press. These are oftentimes very important email, but the problem is when I added the podcast, I just got a flood of email, and I started to get buried. And I had, I started to get behind. I promised to respond to all of the email I received from you guys, and I have, and I continue to do that. But I realized I had to figure out a different system. And, my situation certainly wasn't the worst. I've heard of folks with, tens of thousands of email in their inbox. Mine wasn't quite that bad, but it was bad. And it was taking me upwards of a month to respond to some folks, and I didn't like that. And so I put a system in place that has worked for me. And again, none of this is going to be earth shattering. Maybe, hopefully, if this is a problem for you, some of the things I've done can be useful or helpful to you. But, I trust me, no one will label this podcast as genius. But it's practical stuff that's helping me. Hopefully it'll help you. And just to kind of give you a look into my email. Before, I basically have 3 email accounts. dr@doughroller.net, of course, I mention it on every show. I have another email account that I set up years ago when I first started the blog that I don't really use, but it sort of sits out there. And then I have a personal email account. And then, of course, I have my work email. So I guess I have 4 email accounts that I sort of have to manage. And we'll talk a bit about whether that's a good idea, but that's my situation. My main email that I focus on the most is dr@doughroller.net. As I'm recording this podcast, I have 38 messages in my inbox. We'll talk about why that is in a minute, but I have 38, which is very manageable Of course, what I like to get to is inbox 0, and we'll talk about why I'm not there at the moment. But I'm close, 38. I mean, I could literally get to inbox 0 in, 15 to 30 minutes probably. But my personal email account, 2,323 email and messages in that inbox. I'm going to talk about why that is and what I'm going to do about it. And then this sort of third email account that I mentioned that kind of I set up years ago that I kind of more or less ignore is 181 messages. But I got to deal with that as well. And so we're going to talk about that. So what I thought we'd do today is first I would share with you how I conquered my primary email account, DoughRoller.net. At the time I dealt with this, which was several months ago, it had probably 300 to 500 messages in it, which was just, unwieldy. Certainly not as bad as the 2,000 or 3,000 I have in my personal email account, but still that was a lot of messages to deal with. So I'm going to do a couple of things. One, I'm going to talk through how I dealt with the initial problem, right? Forget keeping the inbox up to date. How do I just deal with the 300 to 500 messages that were in there? How did I do that? I'm going to walk through that. Very simple. I'm going to also then walk through what I'm going to do with the email, the email account that's got over 2,000. That's a different kind of problem. And you may have an account with even more. So that I haven't dealt with, but I'm going to walk through how I'm going to deal with that. Then I'm going to talk about how I keep my current email, to a manageable level, generally inbox 0. As I said, it's got 38 at the moment. But I'm going to talk about sort of the day-to-day process that I follow. And then I'm going to finish with just a few tools that I use or have used in the past that I think are helpful. And so give you some ideas there. And of course, you may have your own approaches to this and your own tools that you use. Maybe you have some great email tools that I won't mention on this podcast. And, if that's so, would love to hear about it. So email me, another email for me to deal with, right? Email me at dr@DoughRoller.net. But I thought I would, I wondered, should I record a podcast on this topic? I mean, this is a personal finance, money, investing show. But, the reality is email is a big part of our lives. It certainly affects our money. Certainly my email for my blog relates to money. And at work, of course, it does. Managing your email productively frees you up to do other things. So I thought it was worth talking about. And so that's what we're going to do. And let's kind of start. I mentioned for my main account, I had about 300 to 500 messages in it. Not maybe the worst, but not manageable. And there's just this gut-wrenching feeling that I was out of control, that there's an email message lurking in there that I should have responded to, and I hadn't. Or I'm missing something. Maybe there's a great opportunity in there. Maybe Warren Buffett emailed me. Okay, that's not realistic. But, there could be a reporter that wants to talk to me. Maybe that someone wants to advertise on my blog. I get a lot of email like that, and sometimes I miss them. And it was just a feeling of being unorganized. It was not a good feeling. It was a feeling of out of control. That's really what it was for me. And again, when I started getting a lot of email because of this podcast, and that started to build up, and I was delayed in getting back to folks. And you guys were very, I think, understanding, and I'm grateful for that. But I didn't like that. That's not how I wanted to do business. That's not how I wanted to interact with you all. It's not how I wanted to interact with folks that might be interested in some sort of business relationship. Or just folks, maybe they don't listen to the podcast, but they read one of the posts on the blog and they just had a question. They're trying to figure out, an important issue in their lives as it relates to money. And here I am with their email in my inbox stuck there somewhere because I haven't gotten to it. I didn't like that. And so that really motivated me to try to make some changes. So the first thing I had to deal with before I could figure out the day-to-day is I needed to deal with the 300 to 500 email messages in my inbox. And my solution, again, this is nothing, earth-shattering here. But the first thing I recognized was it's just, it's going to take work. Unless I'm going to mass delete all of the email, I had to recognize it's going to take me some time. I got to work through 300 to 500 email. A lot of them will be spam, and I can just delete them. Or some of them, may be legitimate email. I don't need to respond to them, though. I can just file it away or delete it. Some are going to take time for a reply. It's interesting. Some of the email I get from readers of the blog and listeners to this podcast, some of them are things like, I get this a lot. People will send me a link to an article. Hey, you talked about such and such a topic, and I found an article I thought you might be interested in. And I just, look at it, reply to them, say thank you. It's a very, very easy, quick reply. And then it depends on the article what I might do. I got one the other day from a listener about personal capital in a study. And that was interesting. I'll probably include a link to that in my newsletter. So I'll do, but it's a very quick response. Other times I get email from folks and they've written me, 1,000-word email with a really complicated, financial situation. And, I try to respond in some helpful way, but sometimes there's just, there's, for whatever reason, there's not much that I can do or not much help I can give them. But, those sorts of replies, they take longer. So the point is, I knew dealing with 300 to 500 emails, some would be easy, but some would not be easy. It was going to take me some time, and I just had to accept that. And again, unless I was just going to mass delete all of the email, and I wasn't going to do that. So the way I did it was I blocked out stages of time, and so I would say, okay, for the next 30 minutes, I'm going to do nothing but email, and I'm just going to plow through. It's not unlike how I work regularly, as I mentioned in a previous podcast. My sort of way that I work and the way that I'm productive, this was in podcast 129, is I work in 25-minute segments, particularly when I'm writing. And I set a timer. And the same will be helpful here in dealing with email. And so that's what I did. I set out a block of time, and that's all I did. And as part of that, I knew it would take me days, maybe even a couple of weeks, depending on how much time I could block out. As part of that process, and this was very important, I also did something else. I decided that I would be at inbox 0 for all current email. So in other words, if I were working through this now, all email that I would receive today, I would address. I would, respond to if it needed a response, delete it if it didn't need a response, or respond to it and then delete it. But I was going to deal with all of my daily email as it came in while I worked through the backlog. So, and the idea there was, it was a way for me to keep things from getting worse. When you're in a hole, stop digging. Well, kind of that similar thing. Or when you're in debt, don't go into more debt. So it's like, well, I don't want to go into more email debt. So while I'm working through the backlog, which I did in reverse order, so I started with the oldest email and sort of worked my way forward in blocks of time, I also managed my current email. And I'll talk about how I did that later in the show, but I wanted to make sure that while I was addressing, the email from a month ago, I wasn't just creating more problems for me by ignoring current email. Now, the last thing that I did, and this was critical, was that as I was working through the email messages, a lot of times the messages were from subscriptions, newsletters that I'd signed up, or maybe I'd bought something online and the company I bought it from was sending me sales or coupons or whatever. And for each email that came to me as part of a subscription, I asked myself, is this really critical? Do I really need this? Most of the time, I would say 9 times out of 10, the answer was no. And so I took the time to unsubscribe to that email. That was critical. It took me more time, of course, as I was working through all of the email, but it saves me a ton of time down the road because I don't have to deal with those emails from that company anymore. So again, there are some subscriptions that I have that I, of course, keep. But for those that just weren't useful or I hadn't really focused on, hadn't read for a while, I figured there's just no reason to keep getting this and filling my inbox. It's going to save me a lot of time down the road. So I would take the time to unsubscribe for those subscriptions that I didn't need. It's so easy just to delete it. And you figure, the next time it comes in, I'll just delete it. But man, those things add up after time. So take the time to unsubscribe. And, by the way, that's true of the newsletter I send you if you don't read it. Why get it if you're not going to read it? If you read it, great. I hope you do and hope it's helpful to you. And would love to hear your thoughts on the newsletter. I try to make it useful every week. But, if you don't read it, why keep it in your inbox? So that's what I did. I unsubscribed. And that process took me I would say it took me about a week, actually, maybe a week and a half to work through 300 to 500 email. And I got down to inbox 0. Now, I maybe could have done it quicker. I suppose I could have done it in a day, given the number of messages if I just spent a whole day, but I wasn't able to do that. Now, of course, you may not be able to spend that much time. Maybe it takes you longer. Maybe you have more email to deal with. But that's how I did it for my main email account. and it worked. It worked very well. As I said, I'm staring at an inbox now with 38 messages. We'll talk about why that is in just a minute. But I want to go, before we move on to how you deal, or how I deal with my email on a day-to-day basis, I want to talk about my second email account that's got, as I said, let's see here, 2,323 email. What am I going to do there? I could take the same approach, right? It's going to take me longer, a lot longer, for two reasons. Obviously, it's got more email, that's obvious, but also it's not as important of an inbox to me as dr@DoughRoller.net is. So I wouldn't spend as much time on it. But for this email box, where you've got thousands of messages, I think you have sort of two options. There's the nuclear option. It's basically where you delete everything. You know, maybe you keep the last week of email. Maybe you keep the last month of email. You might set a line there. But for everything older than that, you delete it. Or maybe you archive it in some way if you're just scared to delete it. Select it all and move it to a folder, old email. And if it's important enough, the person's going to email you again. Or if you find yourself searching for an old email, you've still got it in a folder somewhere, and you can search for it if you need to. But that's the nuclear option. And again, you could apply it to everything in that inbox, or I think probably what most people would be comfortable with is just picking a certain time period. I'll keep everything for the last 2 weeks, archive everything else. And that's exactly what I'm going to do with this personal email account. I would actually be comfortable nuking the whole thing, but I probably won't. I will, for me, I'll probably keep the last week and work through it. Actually, here's what I'll do. I will work through the last week of email, and I will take note of anything that's really important. You know, my goodness, if I deleted that email, that would have been a real problem. That's an important email. Because what I can do then is maybe search the inbox for email like that, if I want to. But I'll probably do the last week, noting if there's any critical email or not, unsubscribing to stuff that I no longer need, which is a big issue for my personal email account. Because most my friends and family don't email me there. Rarely do they. My wife actually knows me well enough now that if she really wants to send me an email, she sends it to dr@DoughRoller.net because she knows that's the email I monitor. She hasn't sent me an email to my personal email in months. But most of my friends, they'll hit me up on a text message, or they'll call me, or on Facebook. So my personal account, a lot of subscriptions. So I will absolutely start to unsubscribe to everything as I go through the last week. But beyond that, I'm just going to nuke the rest, and I'm going to archive it. And it'll still exist if I want to search it, but I am not going to go through 2,000 email. It's just too much, and it's not as important an email account. If I'd let DoughRoller get to that level, I probably would have to take a different approach because of the importance. But for my personal email account, not that important. Now, there is a second option. If you've got a couple thousand messages and they're really important, you may have to take the conventional approach rather than the nuclear option. You may have to undertake conventional warfare and clear out the email, message by message. It's going to take a long time. I would still use the process that I described for my DoughRoller account, where I start fresh and make sure I clear out all of my current email each day while blocking out time to start with the oldest email and work forward. There are some tools that you can use that will be very helpful to you. I will touch on those at the end of the show. They will be helpful for you whether you're dealing with thousands of email or hundreds. And it's a tool that I actually used on my personal email account in particular. So I'm going to get to that. That'll be at the end here. So there are some tools that you can use to help you do that. But again, I'm going to go with sort of a hybrid, the nuclear option, except for the last week. And that'll be how I deal with my personal email account. For the third email account, by the way, I want to get rid of it. I won't actually delete the account, but I don't want any email going to that account that's important to me. So there's only 181 email in that account. So what I'll do is block off an hour, go through, unsubscribe to everything I don't need. If there are important email in there, go in and figure out how I can change the email so they send it to my dr@DoughRoller.net address. I just don't want email in that account. It's just another account I have to deal with. Now, once you clear out your inbox, the question is, how do you keep it that way? And that's as big a challenge as getting to inbox zero in the first place. So here's what I do. The first thing is I pick set times during the day when I check my email. For me, it's usually twice a day, first thing in the morning and towards the end of the workday. Occasionally, I'll check it a third time, sometime around lunchtime. And when I'm not checking the email, I often will close out of the email because I have this habit of checking it throughout the day. That was my problem. I'd check it throughout the day, and I wouldn't often deal with the email. I'd kind of look at it. It was almost like checking Facebook. It was just a way to kill time. And so I find that if I close my email app, then I don't check it. And I'll even turn off alerts, and then I'll check it, as I said, usually twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day. And doing this, there's a couple of reasons why I found this beneficial. The first is it just keeps me productive. It's just, checking email every 10 or 20 minutes is just not a productive way to spend your time. And that's the probably the biggest reason. But the other thing is and it gets to my second sort of tip for inbox zero is the one touch rule. You want to touch each email only once. And by touching, I include reading it. If you read an email, you've touched it. So now deal with it. And what I find is that when I was checking my email throughout the day, I wouldn't follow the one-touch rule because when I was checking my email, it was really more to kill time. It wasn't that I had blocked out the time I needed to deal with the email that I found. Instead, I might deal with an email if there was a quick way to deal with it. But if there was an email that took some time, I just brush by it because I was just checking the email to kill time. I wasn't actually checking it to deal with the email. And so I would often times touch an email multiple times. Read it. Oh, I don't want to deal with that. So I'd leave it there. Then, and the next day I'd see it again. Oh, there's that email again I got to deal with. And maybe I'd read it again, and I would put it off. When I focus on checking my email just twice a day, when I do it, I'm like, okay, I'm going to have some email in there. They're going to be a real pain to deal with, but I'm going to deal with them. I've blocked this time off first thing in the morning, into the business day, sometimes at lunch. I've blocked this time off. I'm going to deal with it. And so that's my goal. I can't say I'm perfect at it, but it's to touch each email one time. By the way, I try to use that with everything. So when something comes, if I'm going to check the mail, the mail comes in, I'm going to look through the mail. My plan is I'm going to deal with it. So the junk gets thrown away. If I've got a bill, I'll oftentimes open it up immediately, walk right over to the computer, pay it, throw it away. So it's the same with email. If I sit down and read an email, I want to deal with it right then. It just saves a ton of time. It saves sort of the emotional baggage that you can start to carry as you read email that you don't deal with and all the other things going on in your life. It's like it starts to build up in the back of your mind. I've got all this stuff I've got to deal with, and it's sort of hanging over you. And I just don't like that feeling. So, I pick a time, in my case, 2 to 3 times a day when I deal with it. I try my best. I'm not perfect, but I try my best to follow the one-touch rule. The third thing I do, and I mentioned this earlier, but I continue to unsubscribe. Even having gone through all of my email, I still get email from subscriptions, that maybe come in once a month or once a quarter. And if I don't need them, I unsubscribe. I take the time right there. That's the one touch for that email. The one touch rule applies to clicking the unsubscribe button, filling out whatever I need to unsubscribe, done, delete the email, and it's gone. On this point, one tip that I know some people follow, I don't do this, but I know some that do. They create an email account just for the subscriptions and the junk, so that when they need to put their email in because they're buying something, they'll put that junk email in. They have access to it. They can go to that email account if they need to, but it's not the email account they're going to give business associates, colleagues, friends, family. It's just for all of the online junk that you have to deal with. And they rarely check it. They don't care about inbox zero for that email. It might have 10,000 email in it. They don't care. But it keeps all of this junk out of the email accounts they do care about. So again, that's not a tip I use, but I know some people do, and they've used it very successfully. For me, it would still trouble me that I've got this email account out there with 10,000 email. I would think, well, is it possible that something important's in there? It would drive me crazy. But for some people it works, so I mention it. Maybe it's a tip that will work for you. The fourth and final thing I do to try to get to inbox zero, and you're thinking, Rob, you're not at inbox zero, you're at inbox 38. Nice point. And that brings me to my fourth and final tip: be flexible. So, inbox 5 won't kill you. I'm at inbox 38 because the last couple of days I haven't gotten to inbox 0. It's actually on my to-do list today. And again, it won't take me very long. But there's also another reason. I get email in response to my newsletter each week. I've started asking a question of the week, and I get some great responses. This week, the response level was a little bit lower, I think because of Thanksgiving. But in most weeks, it's, it can be a couple hundred email. And I let those build up in my inbox, and I batch process them as part of a blog post and often a podcast to cover that question and all of your answers. And so that's, one way that I'm not always at inbox 0, but that's okay. I know those emails, they all have the same ray line, and I can quickly go through them, record all of your replies, create the blog post. If there's going to be a related podcast, create the podcast. I do that in Evernote, and I can batch process those email in a pretty short period of time, depends how many there are. And so, the point is, I think inbox 0 is my goal, but I also want to be flexible. I'm also flexible in another way. While I do pick 2 to 3 times a day to deal with email, occasionally I've got some time to kill. I've got my iPhone with me or my tablet, and I will use the time, if I'm waiting for somebody or whatever, to just go through my email while I've got that time on my phone and deal with the email that I can, so that when I do get back to my email in the allotted time each day, I've got fewer email to deal with. I guess the overall point is, the goal isn't really inbox 0. The goal is to manage your email effectively. For me, that's generally inbox 0. But the point is, we ought to be flexible. Like I said, most times I'm not literally at inbox 0. Most of the time I'm at inbox 5 or fewer. And that's where I'll be when I'm done going through the email today, later this afternoon. But again, I think the key is flexibility. Okay. Now, what are some of the tools that I use to help me with all of this? First of all, to me, the best email app is Gmail. By far, Gmail, it deals with spam. I think the best. It has folders that the sort of the standard folders are primary, social, and promotions. It's just a good way to divide up your email. It's something that Gmail does automatically, and I think you can train it. You can move an email from one tab to the next. You can create new tabs if you want, and you can train it. And so I think, but I think it works very well. And the other thing about Gmail is that it has great free and paid add-ons that we're going to talk about that are great to use, that help you manage your email even better. And we're going to talk about a few of those. So I found Gmail, no question for me, Gmail is the most important email tool that I use. And by the way, dr@DoughRoller.net is actually hosted on it's a Gmail account. I use the Gmail app and run my email servers through Gmail. So even though you're emailing, it's not an @gmail.com address, it's DoughRoller.net. When you send me an email, it goes through Gmail. And I've just found it to be the best way to deal with email. A couple of things that I use for this, by the way, and I've started to do this less and less because I have a slightly different way of processing it. But with Gmail, not only can you move things to a folder, you can also label email. So you can give a single email multiple labels. And I would do that when I would receive email from all of you. I would oftentimes indicate, I might respond to your email message. And then if I wanted to include that email in a future podcast, I would label it as follow-up. And then I could simply go to all of the email with that label, look at all of the emails that I'd planned to include in a future podcast, pick the ones that were relevant for that podcast, and use them. Now, I have a slightly different system now because I'm using Evernote, but that feature of Gmail has been very useful. All right. The second tool is called unroll.me, UNROLL.me. This is a fantastic tool. This is particularly useful when you're dealing with an inbox with just a ton of email. And it may do more than this, but its key features, it does two things. It will scan your email And it will, I don't know how it does this, but it identifies, probably just by looking for the word unsubscribe, but it will identify all the email that you've received that is from a subscription. So you subscribe to an email, it will identify all of those. And it will create a list for you. And then you can go through the Unroll.me app, it's online, and say, okay, I see all of these emails that I've received that are parts of subscriptions. For each one, you can click a button, unsubscribe. And Unroll.me will, I guess the way it works is shoot off an email to unsubscribe you to that subscription. And for those you want to keep, you have the option to roll them up into a single email. So in other words, let's say there are 10 things you subscribe to. Rather than getting 10 individual emails, Unroll.me will intercept those 10 email, package them together in a single email from Unroll.me, and send you those subscription emails in just a single email. And you can set how often you receive it. For me, I receive it every single day. And I'm actually looking through my email now to see if I can see an example. I think I've deleted all of the current ones and haven't gotten the one yet for today. But what you do is you see in a single email all of the subscription emails that you've received that day. It's a great way to unsubscribe to subscriptions you don't want, and it's a great way to reduce the number of email you get down to one email that includes all of your subscription email that you received that day. I find that to be extremely useful. I don't use that on DoughRoller.net, but I do use that for my personal email, and it's been very helpful. The third tool is called the email game. This can be helpful, again, when you're trying to work through a lot of messages, and it works with Gmail. I don't know if it works with other email packages, but it works with Gmail. And basically, I think it might work with, I guess it's just Gmail and Google Apps. So, for example, it would work with DoughRoller.net because it's run through Google Apps. You put in your email address. In fact, I've got it up on the screen now. It's emailga.me. And you can put in your email address. So I'm going to put in my personal email address, which is a Gmail account. And then you click the Let's Play button. And what it will do is basically bring in your email from that account and set a timer. And you basically work through your email to a timer. And it actually has like a smiley face that gives you an idea of how well you're doing. So I put in my personal email address, and you have to give it access to it, which I did. And I can reply to this email message, forward it, skip it, archive it, delete it, and you work through as quickly as you can. It's just basically kind of think of it as, I time my work, 25-minute segments. This kind of does the same thing. The first email, by the way, that comes up is from IFTTT, if then this, then that. I don't know if you're familiar with IFTTT.com. Great website to automate some workflows. And I don't need that. So I could just delete it. And the smiley face kind of turns to half grin because I've made some progress. And then I see an email from Virgin Mobile, which is where my daughter has her account, that we've somehow switched to a new plan. I did not know that. I'm going to have to talk to her about that. So I hit the skip button, and they don't like that. I've skipped an email. So I violated my one-touch rule, but I need to talk to my daughter, and I can't do that right now. I'm recording this podcast, and she's at work. Anyway, that's the idea of the email game. You can keep working through it. It's kind of a way to sort of motivate you to get through a lot of email very, very quickly, and it's free. So there's the third tool. The fourth tool, and this works with Gmail again, it's called Boomerang. And this tool does a lot of different things. But one of the things that I like about it, let's say you've got an email and you've got to deal with it. For whatever reason, you can't deal with it at the moment. Maybe you're waiting on something from someone else. You just can't resolve it right now. This is the one case where the one-touch rule doesn't work. The email from Virgin Mobile is a perfect example. What if I want that out of my inbox? Well, what am I going to do? I don't want to lose sight of that. People say don't use your inbox for a to-do list, but I don't know. It's a pretty good thing to me. I could put it in a folder that says, to do, but then that's just another folder that I've got to check. I'm not sure that helps me. Some people do it that way. That's fine if you do. Well, Boomerang can help you. You can boomerang the email. You can say, look, I don't need this right now, but I want you to put this back in my inbox one day from now. And so out it goes out of your inbox, and it boomerangs back a day later or 2 days later or whatever you want. There are other features to this. You can set an email to be sent out in a day from now. So let's say you've got an email and what you need to do is respond, but you don't want to respond today. You want to respond tomorrow, but you'd like to have it out of your inbox. You can type your response now and set it to go send out a day later or whatever time period in the future. You've dealt with it. It's off your list. You don't have to worry about it. Boomerang will take care of the rest. So that's the fourth tool. That's one that I've used in the past. Actually, I'm not using it right now, but probably will start because it's a great tool. And the fifth thing isn't a tool; it's a suggestion. There are tons of apps and add-ons for Gmail. I mean, I could probably do a whole show on add-ons to Gmail. But I'm not going to. Instead, I'm going to empower you. Just search in Google for Gmail add-ons or similar type of search queries, and you'll find all kinds of things. I'm looking here one, end inbox overwhelmed with these 10 Gmail add-ons. Very handy, 6 helpful add-ons for Gmail. That's from ZDNet. Do-it-yourself genius, 15 free Gmail plugins to help you conquer your inbox. You won't have to go through too many of these articles to find what you need to help you with email. Again, this is in the context of Gmail, and that's true whether you're trying to clean out your inbox, keep it at zero, or just work more productively. And there's just a ton of those sorts of add-ons that can be very helpful and very, very useful. And it's another, just like I said, one of the big reasons why I love Gmail. So with that, that's sort of my approach to email. I'm not crazy insane about inbox zero at the end of every day, but that's by and large where I get usually not more than a couple. As I said, I've got 38 in there. So I'm going to have to end this show now so that I can get ready to get back down to inbox zero. Hey, if you have a different way of doing it, you have other tools or apps that you use, would love to hear from you. Would love to share those with everybody in a future podcast or perhaps in the newsletter. And shoot me an email, dr@DoughRoller.net. Would love to hear from you. Email me about anything, because as you know, I'm now close to inbox zero. So I will reply certainly within a couple of days. That doesn't really sound like inbox zero. Well, I'm close. It's manageable. So I will respond much, much more quickly than I did several months ago, and I'd love to hear from you. Hey, hope you have a great day. Until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy, you know what it is. It's financial freedom.